Well, hey everybody, so good to see you all with us today, those of you in this room, and I want to welcome those of you who are joining us online. We're so glad that you're part of North Shore this weekend as we're in this series that we're calling This Is Home. And it's really all about the kind of core values or the principles and practices, the house rules, if you will, that define what matters most around here and shape how we want to live our lives. And just to catch you up, if you've missed any of the last few weeks, we started with this value: we keep Jesus at the center. And all the things we want to talk about, all the things we want to do, we want to keep Jesus at the center. Not success or comfort or rules, but the person, the teaching, the life, the salvation of Jesus. And then we talked about how we're a church. We want to be here for those who are not here. That we're actually not here for ourselves or to be inward focused, but to think about those who aren't here, even people who want nothing to do with church. How can we exist and be a church that wants to bless and reach out and love them well? And then last week we talked about wanting to dream big and pray bigger, because nothing is too hard for God. And we don't want to set goals that are based on what we can do. We want to set goals that are based on what He can do. And I hope if you missed any one of those weeks, you'll go back and watch and get caught up, because these are the priorities. These are the stuff that we want to value here at North Shore. Well, this week, as we dive into our next kind of house rule, it has all to do with one of these. Everyone see this? Everyone know what this is? It's that $1 bill. It's quite an amazing thing if you think about it. Here's how this works. If I give you one of these, I'm supposed to get something back in return. Or if I give a person a lot of these, I'm supposed to get something really nice back in return. Like I can go to a restaurant and get an amazing dinner. I can go to a hotel and stay in a beautiful room. I can go to a car dealership and drive away in a new car that's instantly worth about half of the dollars that I actually gave him. Every home, by the way, every home or house has some kind of a house rule about this. You know, it could be we spend it, or we save it, or we budget it, or we borrow it, or we just try to hold to it, keep it, cling to it. Problem is, when it comes to the house rule around these, it's usually an unwritten rule. Ever notice that? It's usually something that's not written down, may not be explicit, we don't want to talk about, because for the most part, we don't like talking about this. I mean, this is a personal thing. We think of it as a private thing. We don't want to talk about how we handle it. You might feel quite comfortable talking about your work life or relationships, maybe even a struggle or a sin, but when it comes to this, or when it comes to what's in your checkbook, or when it comes to your credit card statement, that's personal, that's private, right? So as we dive into this, I just want to be clear from the beginning, we are not talking about money because the church wants your money. Okay, we're not talking about money because the church wants your money. We're talking about it because no one's really talking about money. I mean, yes, we talk about how the economy's doing. We'll talk about how the Dow is doing. We'll talk about how wages are doing. But what about how people are doing? The people who spend what they don't have. People who throw away what they do have. People who cannot stop worrying about this, no matter how many of these they seem to have. Did you know that according to the American Psychological Association, the number one source of stress for Americans today is money? Number one source of stress. No one's talking about how money is the source of so many bad decisions in our day. No one's talking about how money is the number one cited reason for divorce in this country. And it's rarely about not having enough money. No one's talking about how money gets used not just to assess the value of things, but to assess the value of people. All the time. You get a few more of these and suddenly you feel like you're a more important person. You get treated that way. And I'll just tell you right now, this is the source of far more shame for people than it is any kind of worth or value or dignity. But guess what? Do you know who talked a lot about this in his day? Jesus. It wasn't meant to be a trick question. You know, you're at a church, so like 1 out of 2 questions, you just know it's going to be Jesus. You can just throw it out there, okay? Jesus talked a lot about this. In fact, 1 out of every 7 verses in the Gospel of Luke refers to money or possessions. 2/3 of the parables that Jesus taught was talking about money or possessions. And I mean, had he gone to even a decent seminary, he would have learned you cannot preach 2 out of 3 sermons on money. No one's going to come back. And here's the thing, in his day, many people did not. In fact, Jesus spoke more about money than, and here's the thing, you can put almost any subject in this blank. More about money than heaven, hell, sex, relationships, marriage, politics, more about money. In fact, the only thing Jesus talked more about than money was this idea of the kingdom of God. And that was Jesus' way of talking about the power and presence of God that was available to ordinary people like you and me simply by trusting Jesus. But get this. Do you know what the one thing Jesus said was the key threat to experiencing or entering the kingdom of God? It was money. In fact, Jesus once put it very plainly. He said, you cannot serve God and, any guesses? Money. Now here's the thing. If I hadn't started this message talking about money, or if you weren't familiar with this verse or these words that Jesus said, I can almost guarantee you if I just put these words up there, you would have filled in this blank with something else. I mean, we would have said, well, maybe you cannot serve God and act out sexually or abuse alcohol or have unhealthy relationships. Because very few of us are willing to stare money in the face and think carefully about what's my deepest loyalty? Where's my true allegiance? What am I actually counting on and relying on? Now, I know what some of you may be thinking when it comes to this line, you cannot serve God and money. Some of you are thinking, I'll admit that Jesus said that out. I'll admit that those words came out of his mouth, but I'm quite sure he wasn't talking to someone like me. And here's the reason. We all have this kind of phrase in our mind, because I clearly don't have enough of it to have a problem with it, right? I mean, this is just the way we think. I mean, if I had more money, God, if you just gave me a little more money, I could show you how I don't have a problem with it. God, if you just gave me a little more money, I could show you I'm not that materialistic at all. If you just gave me a little more money, I could show you, God, how free from financial stress my life could be. Question, who do you think Jesus is actually talking to? Most of us would say, and this is just, again, being aware of how money works on our soul, most of us, our simple reflexive response is, it's got to be somebody else. Somebody who makes more money than me, somebody who carries more debt than me, somebody who spends more impulsively than me. Surely Jesus is talking to those people, but here's the thing, he's not. Or it's not just those people. I'll tell you who he's talking to. Jesus is talking to anyone who has ever had any one of the following thoughts at least one time about this. If I just had more of this, then I'd be happy. If I just had more of these, then I'd be secure. If I just had more of this, then I'd be satisfied. If I just had a few more of these, then I wouldn't worry so much anymore. Which means he's actually talking to all of us. If you've got just one of these, just one, he's talking to you. And here's the thing, he never said, the problem is the money, or money is evil, or this is somehow inherently bad. He never said the problem is the money. The problem is how we think about money. And so today, I want to walk through 4 very basic myths about money that Jesus talked about. And then I want to tell you about the house rule, the core value, the practice he gave his followers, his disciples, and the one that we want to have as a church when it comes to money, because it's always a house rule, whether it's written or not, and we want to be really explicit about that here. So here's the first myth we want to look at. It's the ownership myth. And the ownership myth when it comes to money goes something like this. I own my money. I own my money. I mean, who else would? Think about it. When you get your paycheck, that money now, you think it belongs to me. When you get your financial gift, that money now, it belongs to me. When I get an allowance, if you're a young person, you're thinking, that money now belongs to me. Why? Because it's in my possession. Because I now feel like I control what happens to it or where it goes. Because there's actually laws in this country that prohibit someone from forcibly taking it from you. That must mean that I or that you are the owner of the money. And here's the thing. If you're not a follower of Jesus, this conclusion, it makes total sense. I mean, it makes total sense. If there's no real purpose in this life, if there's no God to whom your life is accountable, if this life is all there is, then sure, your money, it would seemingly belong to you, right? Problem is, No matter how smart you are with your money, no matter how wise you are when it comes to investing or saving or accruing, money has this funny way of being a much better master than it is a servant. In other words, money has a way of being much more of an owner or owning you than you actually owning it. Think about it. When you get that promotion or that pay raise you've been looking for, but you think you're going to worry less, but now suddenly, instead of worrying less about money, you're worrying more about it. So who owns who in that scenario? Think about this. You're walking through that store, and you see that thing that you didn't know you need until you saw it, and then you knew, gosh, I got to have that. And you start thinking things like this, gosh, it's zero down and no payments for 200 months. I'm sure I can do something about this. So you grab that piece of plastic, and it's yours. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm saving so much money by buying this. Who owns who in that scenario? Jesus actually made this really, really clear. In fact, one of the most clear analogies he gave for money is quite different than ownership. Look at what he said. This was from a parable he taught about money. He said, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting that rich man's possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what's this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer. Anyone notice kind of a different theme or a different analogy when it comes to where we stand with money? Manager. A manager has access to the owner's money. A manager is able to use or make deals with the owner's money. A manager actually probably has more day-to-day contact with the owner's money, but he was never intended to be the owner. His job was to use it, to manage it in such a way that it would reflect the will and character of its real owner. And here's the thing. When it comes to this, even just one of these, you are not the owner. You're just the manager. Just the manager. And here's how I know this is true. You can go out in your life and give your life away to make all the money in the world. You can accrue great wealth and property and investments and resources. But then a day will come when your heart stops beating and your lungs stop breathing and you die. And here's the thing. We all are going to face that. Last I checked, the mortality rate for human beings was hovering right around 100%, okay? Everybody's going to face that day at some point. Do you know what percentage of your wealth you're going to take with you? 0. You are never the owner. You're just the manager. In fact, Jesus would say not only do you take 0 with you, what you take with you is actually a record of what you did with every last dollar. Just like the manager in that story. And one day, you and I, we will be asked to give an account not of how much you made or what tax bracket you're in, but of what you did with what God entrusted to you. Give an account of your management. And I got to be honest, there's a lot of things that I think about in terms of that moment when I would see God or meet him one day. This is a question I don't usually think about being asked. Scotty, what did you do when you got that raise? Or did your lifestyle change as you made more money, or did someone else's lifestyle get to change because you made that money? Did you spend first or give first? Give an account of your management. Give an account of your management. Give an account of your management. Why? Because you're not the owner. We're just the managers. And that's the myth of ownership. The second myth we need to look at is the security myth. And the security myth goes something like this. The more money I have, the more secure I will be. And I can just tell you, this is something I wrestle with a ton in my own life because I think if I just had a little more, then my life would be secure, then I wouldn't have these fears, then I wouldn't have these worries. But the truth is, money is actually it's really lousy at protecting what matters most in your life. It's lousy at it. I mean, it can bring you temporary comfort, yes. It can open doors for you, yes. It can make life more convenient, yes. It can buy you certain opportunities or experience, absolutely. But just think for a moment. Get really honest with yourself. It's really important that you do this. Get really honest with what money cannot do, what it cannot buy. Cannot fix a broken relationship. Cannot change a person's heart. Cannot heal you from cancer or addiction or loneliness. I love how the writer of Proverbs once put it. He wrote this: the wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. That is, we believe our money can make us safe. We believe our money can make us secure. We believe if I just have enough of it, I won't fear anything anymore. My life will somehow be protected. But notice this word, we just imagine this. It's actually just more of a fantasy. And I find myself battling with this temptation, this myth all the time, especially as a new father or a newer father. I find myself thinking, if I just had more money, I could get Nora more stuff, or I could pay for better schooling, or give her more experiences. Then she'd have a better future, right? I mean, we think this way. Then she'd have a better future. Then her life's protected. But then I find myself asking these questions. Can any amount of money protect her from pain? No. Can any amount of money make her feel loved? No. Can any amount of money help her find the right community in life or choose the right person to marry in life? No. Can any amount of money stop her from having tantrums in public places? No, but I would give every last dollar I've got if it would. I promise you right now. But there's this myth of security. If I just have more, I'll be safe, I'll be secure. I just need a little more, and then I'll be safe, I'll be secure. Not knowing that they're just the opposite happen. We feel less and less secure. It's a myth of security. Brings us to another myth, a third myth, and it's this, the contentment myth. And the contentment myth goes like this. The more money I have, the more satisfied I will be. The more money I have, the more I'll finally have enough. I'll finally be satisfied. I'll just be content if I just get to that level. If I just get to that amount. Years ago, I worked for a summer as a hospital chaplain, and during my first week on the job, to visit this man who was dying of cancer. This up. He was surrounded by family members who were yelling at each other over his hospital bed about what was in his will and who it was for. Who should get this? Who should get that? And I clearly startled them because when I walked in, they stopped and said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the chaplain. I'm here to make myself available to you and your family in this difficult time." And one of them actually interrupted and said, "Perfect, a man of God. You can now tell my sister here that there's no way she's getting the second house because of how she's treated our family." And I had no idea what to say in that moment. I'm like, 1 week on the job, I'm a new chaplain, this guy's actually passing away before us, and they're fighting about this kind of stuff, and I skipped the family arbitration class in seminary, so I don't know what's going on. And they just kept fighting over their father's dying body. Ever notice how people are willing to trade what brings real contentment, like relationships or time with loved ones or being with God, for more stuff? Or their pursuit of stuff or status or money. Jesus interacted with this too. He was once teaching to a crowd, actually a crowd of thousands of people. And Luke tells us that this person spoke up and said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, just so you know, in the first century, if a father did not leave a written will, the estate would go automatically to the oldest son, who would decide if he wanted to, divide that up with his siblings or not. So clearly, this statement is coming from a younger sibling who's mad at his older brother for not sharing the inheritance with him. And he's really mad about it, and it's not because he's being cheated out of love or relationship or significance or purpose. He's mad because he's being cheated out of money. And listen to what Jesus said. Jesus replied, "Man," I love this. "Man," it's like the first century version of like dude or bro. Like, "Hey, dude, bro, like check yourself, all right? Who appointed me as a judge or an arbiter between you guys?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." You see, we don't notice greed. Like, lots of sins are a lot more obvious. This one's hard to spot. And then he says these words. This is kind of the why. Because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. It's the myth of contentment. And he's reminding us, Jesus says, of what studies today are showing us to be true time and time again, that after achieving a very basic level of sustenance and well-being, more money doesn't lead to more happiness. This is actually being proven in one study after another. In fact, they're finding now that after a certain point, contentment can start to go down. I love one psychologist who's been writing about this research. He wrote these words. He said, "What we show here for the first time is that in some places, increasing income after some point actually leads to a decrease in life satisfaction. We don't yet know why this is. Perhaps these people work so hard they cannot enjoy life, or they become focused mostly on materialistic goals, or whatever. We just don't know." Well, here's the thing. We actually do know. We know exactly why. It's because money doesn't produce contentment. Money doesn't produce contentment. I know it's like the most countercultural, like we're all going, but yes, it has to. It has to. Think of how we live. It does not produce contentment. I once saw it put this way. We all have kind of a now or where we're at financially right here. And then everybody, in some way or another, no matter how much you have or how much you make, we have this idea of if I was just here, it'd be enough. And what happens is, because we're always striving to get from here to here, we live with this perpetual discontent, this discontentment zone. I'm never quite happy because I'm always here and I want to be here. But here's what happens. The one day that you finally get here, and a lot of you, if you think back to the first job you got or the first paycheck you had, your enough was probably not that much more, and you got there, and what happened? It just became the new now. And then you got a new enough, and you're still living in this place over and over and over. Why? Because if your life is all about more, you will never have enough. You can't. Because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. I know, it's hard to believe. This myth goes real deep. It's this myth of contentment. Which leads to one more myth we need to look at, and it's this one, the generosity myth. The generosity myth, and it goes something like this: the more money I have, the more generous I will be. Another way to say it would be this: I'll give more money once I have more money. And I gotta tell you, a lot of people in our day think this way. I've often tempted to think this way about money. If I just had a little more, of course, I'd be the most generous person in the world if I had all the resources in the world. We just think that about ourselves. But statistically speaking, this is not true. There's a great sociologist that I would encourage you to read sometime. His name is Christian Smith, and he's found that the more money people make, the smaller percentage of income they give away. In fact, I want to show you some of the data he's found. This is from 2012, so it's a little bit dated, but if you just look down the categories of income, as the income goes up, giving percentages actually go down. It's just statistically true. The more people make, the less percentage they give away. So while it is true that a lot of people in our day, and maybe you're in this place too in your life, are facing incredible financial challenges that are stressful and real and painful, here's what's also true. If you're not willing to give when you have just a little, you will be even less likely to give when you have a lot. I want to say that again. If you're not willing to give when you have just a little, you will be even less likely to give when you have a lot. Why? Because here's the thing about generosity. It is not a matter of income. It is a matter of the heart. Always been this way. It's not a matter of income or wealth or the tax bracket you live in. It is a matter of the heart. Your heart is either saying, I get to give or I need to keep. And that kind of dynamic is true with each one of these myths we've talked about. My heart is either I've got enough or I need more. My heart either says my money protects my future or my God protects my future. My heart either says I'm the owner or I'm just the manager. And I just have a certain number of days, a certain number of years on this earth to manage the resources of the true owner in a way that reflects His will in His life. You see, every time Jesus talked about money, He wasn't actually talking about your money. He was talking about your heart, the thing He wants most, which is why money mattered so much to Him. It's not because He wants your money. There's a lot of misconceptions about this in our day. Jesus talked about money, and it wasn't because He asked for money. In fact, Jesus never asked people for money. Go back and try to find it. He never once asked people to give Him money because He wants your heart. He wants your heart. But what He did do is He gave His followers this practice, this habit, that would not just change their hearts, it actually would change the world around them as well. Amazing thing, a really simple thing, really profound. Jesus said, I want you to give, and then it will be given to you. I want you to give, and it will be given to you. Notice there's no should or ought here. There's no burdensome legalism or duty that you have to do this. Jesus just says, this is how life is made to work. This is life in the kingdom of God. Give, and it will be given to you. And notice that it's not just emphasizing the practice of generosity. Jesus is emphasizing the practice of generosity first. Generosity first, because most of us have it flipped around. Most of us think the opposite. We think, me first, give next. Why? Because I got bills to pay, and debts to pay down, and kids to raise, and tuition to afford. So it's me first and give next. But Jesus is turning this on its head and giving you this incredibly, almost irrational sounding experiment to say, let's turn it around and let's give first and say me next. And see what God does. Just to try this. It's very pragmatic, isn't it? There's not a lot of theory here. It's not some abstract theological lecture or discourse. Just a very concrete principle. Give first, me next. And the early church, by the way, the first followers of Jesus, they lived this out. Listen to this description from the early church. This is fascinating. Luke writes in the book of Acts, all the believers were in one heart and mind, And no one claimed, this is amazing, no one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. This doesn't happen on accident, by the way. This is not just what people do. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. This is not normal, folks. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. This first church, this early community of Jesus, was a community of unparalleled generosity. In fact, what was so striking to the outside world, to the Roman world, wasn't just their beliefs, it was their generosity, the way they treated their resources. They shared everything they had. They gave to anyone who had need. And notice this amazing phrase, God's grace was so powerfully at work, there were no needy persons. In other words, because of their giving, because of their heart for God, God's grace was able to do more than they could do on their own. Like, this is about kind of irrational math right here. God can do more with just a little when you give than the math actually says can be done. Some of you know the story from the New Testament of the widow's offering. This woman who came to the temple put in 2 coins, like 2 cents, almost nothing in the offering plate. And then Jesus looked at her, and some of you know the story. What did he say? She gave more, he said, than everybody else. And I've always read that and thought, he's just being kind of figurative. It's just a figure of speech, just to try to encourage people to give. But that's before you actually calculate this with the kingdom math that God does. Think about it. This story of giving just a few cents has been told over and over and over for 2,000 years, and it's inspired hundreds of millions of people to give, and probably hundreds of millions of dollars as well. Which means this woman in the first century who put in those 2 coins has had a greater impact than any other giver in Jesus' day, maybe the greatest impact of any financial gift in history. That's God's math. Every gift counts. Every act of sacrificial generosity. Give, and it will be given to you. Give, and it will be given to you. It's a couple I know who discovered this early on in their marriage. They got married with almost no money, and they were struggling to get by and living on a very tight budget, and many of you have been there or you're there right now. And there was a single mom in their neighborhood, and they started to feel this almost irrational calling, not just to give, but to give first. But they did the math, and it just didn't add up. I mean, the numbers just didn't work out. They had rent to pay, and the bills were stacking up. But God kept nudging their hearts. Give first. Give first. You next. You next. Give first. And so they did. They gave away actually everything they had but $50. Almost $2,000 they gave up everything but that $50. Sounds crazy, right? But that moment in their life was the turning point. It was the turning point, opened the door to the provision of God in their life that they had never seen before. Amazing things started to happen. New job, and a surprise pay raise, and then a better job, and then a unique promotion. And they discovered Jesus actually meant what he said quite literally. Give, and it will be given to you. Give, and it will be given to you. In fact, did you know this? Giving is the only practice in the Bible that God says you can actually just test me. Like, just try me. Give us a run. Give it a shot. Run an experiment. 90 days. Give it a shot. See what I'll do. Which leads to the 4th house rule here at North Shore we want to kind of lean into. We will lead the way with irrational generosity. We will lead the way. We will be a contrast to a world that is me first, give maybe. We will lead the way with irrational generosity. And it's irrational because it's based on a whole different kind of math. It's based on a math that says don't start with yourself and then give, but rather give first and then see what God does. It's a math that says living on 50% of what you have with God's blessing is better than living on 100% of what you have without it. It's a math that says give, and it should be given to you. And here's the thing. Some of you, you've never tried giving before, or you've given kind of occasionally based on certain needs. I want to invite you to start making giving or generosity, give first, a regular practice in your life. Test God. Try him out on this. Give first, me next. Some of you do give. You give quite regularly. I want to invite you to look at the percentage that you give and just have a conversation with God about, God, what are you asking me to do to give more, to spread, to manage your money more the way that you'd have me do it? Give first, me next. Some of you are wondering right now, am I asking you to give here at North Shore? Well, here's what I'll say about that. if you believe that God is at work here, if you're investing in this community, if you call North Shore home, if this is home, I believe that giving is part of that. We want to lead with irrational generosity. And here's kind of a cool fact about our budget. Many of you don't know this. 100% goes to ministry. I mean, the power bill that keeps the light on so we can do ministry. The paper that we buy so we can print curriculum so we can do ministry. The staff we have to partner with you to equip you for your life in the world so we can do ministry. Here's another cool part of this. Over 15% of this budget goes beyond the walls of North Shore, like right out the door, whether that's to a ministry partner or a mission trip someplace outside of our walls, just going out to be generous. But if not here, here's what I'd say. Give somewhere. Try this somewhere in some part of your life with a ministry partner, a mission partner, an area of need that you see in your neighborhood or your community or your city. Nina and I give our first 10% here at North Shore, and then we have other partners and people we support beyond that. But you don't have to do what we do. Just do something. Just take a risk. Because once you realize what God is really like, once you realize that Jesus didn't come into the world asking for money, he came offering freedom and purpose and security and lasting contentment. Once you realize what the story of God is all about, being irrationally generous is like the most logical thing you can do. Because if I give you one of these, I get something amazing back in return. So I thought we'd run a little experiment with these right now, actually. We're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to invite the offering team, the usher team forward. We're going to end with a second offering, but it's a different kind of offering. So it's a reverse offering, which means we're going to give you money. That's right, at church this weekend, we're going to give you money. When the buckets go past, I want you to not put dollars in, but take $1 out. Everyone has to. Don't feel weird. Don't feel awkward. Take $1 out, but just one, okay? Just $1. Stealing from a church is not how you want to start your week, okay? And if you're online, find somebody in your house, take $1 from them. We want you to do this as well. Here's the thing. This moment is a really important reminder of something really profound. And here's the deal. When you take that money out of that bucket, it's reminding you we never actually give anything to God. It's all God's. It all belongs to him. We are just stewards. We are just managers. And I want you to look on the back of this bill. There's 4 key words you need to see. It says, in God we... And I want you to think about, do you believe that as you look at this dollar? Do you really believe that? Because it can be easy to trust God with our sin or maybe even our sorrows, but to trust God with one of these, or a lot of these, is a big, big deal. And some of you think, well, this is so small. I mean, what could God possibly do with something like this? Just think about those 2 coins. And by the way, when it comes to what's in God's eternal portfolio, everything you have is about like this. It's just one of these. The question is, what will you do with what you've been given? And I want you to keep this, take it with you, and keep it with you as a moment where you can go back to it. When you pray, keep it with you. Look at it and say, God, what do you want me to do with these in my life? When you balance your checkbook, keep this with you and think, God, this is a reminder that every one of these I have is yours. And maybe you just want to take out a pen and in the margin or the top to say, write on this little bill. It's legal to do it on the top, okay? I'm not seeing the wrong way. You can just write, give first, me next. And make it a reminder that that's actually true with every one of these you will ever come in contact with. And maybe you just want to start setting these aside. Maybe this will be the first of a stack of many of these that you put together as a new irrational generosity fund that you live out of as you manage the money that has never once belonged to you, but's been entrusted to you so you can do great things with it. Give, and it will be given to you. Give, and it will be given to you. Give, and here's the thing. Jesus will take care of the rest. So let's pray. Jesus, on that cross 2,000 years ago, you did not just love us unconditionally. You gave your life for us. You spent your eternal resources on our souls, our lives, so that we could be with you. And you called us to a life not just of spiritual faithfulness, but of financial faithfulness as well. But let me just say, God, I know, I will confess, first and foremost, it is so hard to trust you with money. I can ask for forgiveness, sure, and I can ask for your blessing, and I can ask for your comfort, but to ask for provision, to ask you to provide when I take a risk and give, or help somebody else, or provide for somebody in need, it's so hard. And so, Jesus, we come to you now, each with a new dollar in hand, that isn't ours. It's always been yours. And the question is not, what are we going to do with this dollar? But how can we use this dollar to reflect you and to point to you and to share with others? And so God used this moment, this $1 that we're going to keep with us from this day forward, give first, me next, to remind us that this is how your kingdom works, that we can trust you with every one of these we have. And as we do, you can do whole new kind of math and a whole new kind of impact on our world. You could change the world as you're changing our hearts with it. And so we entrust our lives, our resources to you, starting with this $1. And everybody who agreed with this prayer said, amen.